I'm a bad motherfucker.
Form and chaos, order and disorder are like rivals competing for supremacy in the vast arena that is our universe. Nature throws grotesque shapes and turbulent events at us, and yet within them we strive to find evidence of patterns we can classify and understand. For centuries, man has struggled to impose order on a perversely irregular world, and what he couldn't understand was often ignored. Now, armed with a new weapon, the computer, man is at last challenging the kingdom of chaos, describing the shapes and forms of a world where the only straight lines are the ones he has introduced.
Real one. Then come to find out, Kek is actually an Egyptian deity, a frog-headed one. And more specifically, Kek, also spelled K-U-K, or K-E-K-U, is the deification of the primordial concept of darkness in ancient Egyptian religion, represented by a frog-headed man, or in female form, a snake-headed woman. They are a symbol of darkness and also represented obscurity and the unknown, and thus chaos.
American alt-right, and I don't know if you know about things called like the meme war, but do you see this as an expression of postmodern fetishistic copycat of the third political theory or nationalism, or do you see some kind of creative chaos in it?
So I don't think that that is something already made, already finished. I think that's
right now. The first things first is the book that I got is actually written by a guy named Taro Warwick. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with Taro Warwick, but he is a writer, illustrator, occultist, blogger, avid gardener from the state of Vermont. He's active in multiple online communities. He was once an administrator of the Times of Poll, a short-term news website platform for activism, and he has participated in a dialogue with numerous pagan and occult orders. So if you haven't seen who that person is, actually, we can go to Rationale Wiki, and that person is actually none other than Sticks and Hammer 666, the good old boy, the guy that is definitely considered to be a frog, alt-right. He was more satanistic or atheistic at point. I guess he's not a believer in Satan anymore.
Я прошу почтить память умершего Алистера Кроули минутой молчания. Если есть в зале какие-нибудь зажигалки и спички, вы можете зажечь и минуту помолчать.
О мой Бог! Един Твой исток, един Твой дух, едино Твое изменение. Позволь мне воспеть Твои совершенства перед людьми. В образе шестиконечной звезды, сверкающей сквозь глупые своды, позволь мне объявить о Твоих совершенствах. Ты явился мне как очень старый Бог, достопочтимый Бог, господин времени с острым серпом. Ты явился мне как радостный и довольный Бог, исполненный могущества король, Отец в самом рассвете сил, с жезлом вселенной, коронованной короной духа. Ты явился мне с мечом и копьем, воинственный Бог в сияющей броне, в сопровождении свиты рыцарей. Ты явился мне как юный и сияющий Бог, Бог музыки и красоты, как юный Бог во всей своей силе, играющий на лире. Ты явился мне как белая пена, как части тела магической...
Russia is traditional Christian country as well as America is.
Okay, boys and girls, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Who was that man that Alex Jones introduced to the United States? Aleksander Dugin.
Worldwide, and our guest is joining us from Moscow, Russia. Aleksander Dugin The media says that he's a top advisor to Putin, but from my research, I'd say it's more like when the media says that I'm telling Trump what to do. That's not really what's happening. We're just
geopolitics of Russia, and you've got the rising phoenix right there. So, as oversimplified as this sounds, that's the chaos symbol. It's a symbol for chaos. This man right here. As oversimplified as this sounds, I think it's pretty fair to say that Alex Jones in the U.S. and Alex Dugin of Russia have been assigned to us by the secret societies as the new forms of intellectual thought.
The situation is a little bit changed. Very interesting. We're living in an important moment of the human history. Now, the initiative to change the world is once more in the hands of Americans, in the hands of Trump. Russia has made a kind of introduction to the change of world order.
Alex Jones presented himself as Donald Trump's brain, talking to Vladimir Putin's brain. So did this actually happen organically? Did Alex Jones find this undercurrent of American thought and he just rode that wave to victory? Did Alexander Dugin do the same after the fall of Soviet Russia?
What do? Go and say, we are a communist? No, don't be stupid, comrade. You go in and tell them that you're a non-communist, or better yet, tell them you're an anti-communist.
Aleksander Dugin, a prominent philosopher, a professor, and he's known to be an advisor to some of the most influential men in Russia. The Russian foreign minister, the second chairman of the state, the United Russia Party chief ideologist, and of course, President Vladimir Putin, not only advising the Kremlin, but in 2008, Dugin became the head of the Department of Sociology of International Relations at Moscow State University. He's been pushing his ideology to Moscow's intellectual elite and young minds ever since. This is one of the most dangerous human beings on the planet today.
This is just Russia's Alex Jones, is what I'm basically finding. Using liberalism as the boogeyman of saying, we're not going to be fake, we're not going to be those people, we're going to be the exact opposite. So the question for me is, where does this man's loyalty ultimately lie? If he wrote a bunch of books saying that he was loyal to Moscow, and if Alex Jones put out a bunch of broadcasts saying that he was loyal to the U.S. or Texas, how do we know that? How do we know that he is actually loyal to Moscow? And secondary, why would we get in bed with those interests?
Duginites see Eurasia in a time tunnel as part of a greater Russian empire, land dominated by a superior culture and civilization. Quote, everything will fall into place if we recognize Russia as a civilization, not just a country. In other words, Russia cannot be compared with other countries such as Switzerland, France, Germany, Belgium, England, Italy, and Spain. Russia should be compared with Europe as a whole, or with the Islamic world, or with the Chinese civilization. Similar to how Karl Marx believed working class people should be constantly informed of their place in society and become class conscious so they would unleash the struggle against the rich, Dugin's recipe calls for all of Europe to become aware of their race in order to bring forth racial struggle. This would not only unite Russians, but it would break apart the European Union bit by bit. This is the architect, the man of thought, who's informing the man of action. And as you will see, the plan is being carried out in diabolical speed and fashion.
Form anti-communist organizations and lead your own opposition so that you will not be defeated.
Let's get people obsessed over expansion, and let's form a new union called Eurasianism. So that's kind of that's like another kind of EU, but based on new principles. He doesn't like the EU, but he wants Eurasia to exist based on his principles. So this is getting into really dangerous territory. Okay, we dismantled the New World Order. We're starting to dismantle the EU. We're dismantling NAFTA and the TPP. So what are the new thought forms? What are the new ideologies that are coming out of this?
Since I have yet to see anything in Dugin's visions of the future that does not lead to gulags and extreme poverty by means of socialism. Now, needless to say, Duginism is inherently anti-capitalist, but that's hardly a surprise for one of the founding members of the National Bolshevik Party, isn't it? Anyway, enough with this book, let's go to the other book that is relevant to understanding Duginism, Четвертая политическая теория, or the fourth political theory. Now, this book is published in 2012 when Dugin was already an advisor for the Kremlin, and it is 15 years after the overt totalitarianism of mid-1990s. Now, I would dare to say that by the time he started writing the fourth political theory, Dugin himself became more, let's say, intellectually disciplined and also a lot more aware of the fact that you can't just go to the world and say, "Hello chaps, I'm here with the Eurasian Empire. Hey there Germany, we'll give you Kaliningrad back in exchange for your Finlandization. What do you think about that? Oh, and by the way, you can have Estonia as part of your influence as long as you play nice with France." I mean, he must have realized somewhere along these years that selling such radical ideas is a lot more of a complex process, and bluntness is not one of them. Now, in the intro, I compared Duginism with cultural Marxism for the simple reason that it follows the exact same path. It started out as a splinter group of the Bolsheviks and then gradually refining itself to become more subversive and a lot less open about its goals. Now, if you remember, the Frankfurt School outright refused to call its institution the Institute for Marxism, but rather opted for a more vague term of Institute for Social Research. Same goes with Duginism. You see, it's not Duginism, but it's continentalism, which is opposed to Atlanticism, and it's not about creating a Russian empire, but about a united and friendly Europe.
And national pride is great, but so is culture and creativity. But I think what Alex Jones and Dugin represent in their secret hearts is the strongest, the fittest is going to survive. We've tricked these people. They think that we're all about nationalism. But what we're going to do is we're going to create this unholy union of the U.S. and Russia. That will be unbeatable, and we'll see where that can take us. And of course, this is all dealing with the secret societies. So these guys, if we're going to take them at face value, it's a guy from Russia who happens to be politically aligned with Putin, and a guy from the U.S. who happens to be politically aligned with Trump.
The fourth political theory was created by Aleksander Dugin, who is a very controversial Russian intellectual. The fourth political theory will be the base for the revolutionary ideologies of the future.
And we are a kind of revolutionary a movement that is analogous to the Bolsheviks.
And that's, if you just think about the chances of something like that happening, like this is what it's all about. This relationship between Alex Jones and Dugin is what it's been all about. His Eurasianism is a satanic cult. Men of action cut a large figure in the history books, but it's the ideas placed in their heads by men of thought that actually determine what they do. Thus, the scribblings of mad philosophers can lead to the death of millions. As the modern-day heir to this tradition, Aleksander Dugin bids fair to break the record. Most Americans don't know anything about Aleksander Dugin. They need to, because Dugin is the mad philosopher who is redesigning the brains of much of the Russian government and public, filling their minds with a new hate-ridden totalitarian ideology whose consequences can only be catastrophic in the extreme, not only for Russia, but for the entire human race. In recent months, as the embrace of Duginist ideas by the Putin regime has become ever more evident, a number of articles have been written calling attention to the threat. Heiser follows Dugin's career, so this is an author who wrote about Dugin, moving from his expulsion from the Moscow Aviation Institute for involvement in proto-Nazi mystical circles in the early 1980s, through his continued development in association with various Thule society-like organizations through the late 80s, his contacts with the anti-democratic European Nouvelle Droite, his co-founding and career with the National Bolshevik Party.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to point out something in regards to National Bolshevism and this idea of white Sharia. You'll notice a lot of people in the alt-right, they'll have like these Hitler avatars. Like they claim to be like, you know, they'll call themselves SS Blitzkrieg, or, you know, they'll have all of these nationalist socialist avatars and you know, personalities and all of that sort of stuff. But this is incompatible with the alt-right and Duginism. But the reason why I say it's incompatible with National Socialism is because if you go and read Mein Kampf, and I'm not saying you have to be for or against it or anything like that.
Yeah, you don't have to agree with Hitler or anybody around Hitler.
Yeah, but the point is, if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler speaks explicitly about pan-Europeanism. The scourge of Europe, and the ridiculous communist idea that all white people are the same. This is what he was against. Okay, this is communism.
Yes.
Hitler never believed that a German was the same as a Russian, or that a Russian was the same as a British.
These alt-right people tried to introduce new topics taken from European New Right, Nouvelle Droite, better, and from fourth political theory, from Eurasianism, from geopolitics. So I think they have introduced traditionalism that was almost unknown in the paleo-conservative.
I just want to read for you an excerpt from Dugin's book. He wrote a book called, I believe it's called The Foundations of Geopolitics. That's what it's called when it's translated. And here's the excerpt, quote, Russia should use its special services within the borders of the United States to fuel instability, separatism, for instance, provoke Afro-American racists. Russia should introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, encouraging all kinds of separatism, ethnic, social, and racial conflicts, actively supporting all dissident movements, extremist, racist, and sectarian groups, thus destabilizing internal political processes in the US. It would also make sense to simultaneously support isolationist tendencies in American politics, unquote.
A new science is emerging from this challenge, a science which promises to describe and explain the infinite complexity of the busy world in which we live. It's a science which is producing a new geometry that offers an insight into the surprising paradox that there is order, even within disorder. It's a science which is turning conventional thinking on its head. A science called chaos.
Dugin says that this liberal threat is not new, but is the ideology of maritime cosmopolitan power Atlantis, which has conspired to subvert more conservative land-based societies since ancient times. He reconstructed the entire history of the world as a continuous battle between these two factions, from Rome versus Carthage to Russia versus Anglo-Saxon Atlantic order today. If we're to win the fight, the subversive fight from the racist ideas such as human rights, Russia must unite around itself all the continental powers, including Germany, Central and Eastern Europe, the former Soviet republics, Turkey, Iran, and Korea, into Grand Eurasian Union strong enough to defeat the West.
Dialectic. Well, it comes from 19th century philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He was born in 1770 and he died in 1831. A dialectic is a method of argument for resolving disagreements. Hegelianism prescribes the Hegelian dialectic.
And we are a kind of revolutionary movement that is analogous to the Bolsheviks.
So those liberals in Hollywood, they're really in trouble because they've got Europe uniting against them, and they now have Alex Jones and other markets such as that uniting against them. The liberals, really, all they have to do is self-reflect and start talking about how they don't really mean it when they talk about human rights, how they're just actually being evil, you know? But I think the problem is that that's all based on this guy being open and honest and Alex Jones being open and honest, and they're the furthest thing from it. Dugin is a Muscovite Russian political activist and ideologue of the contemporary Russian school of geopolitics, often known as Neo-Eurasianism. The core political position of Dugin is a Moscow-based Russian state imperialism to which all other considerations are secondary. Dugin's so-called fourth political theory should be read with caution. Dugin's philosophy mixes a number of both positive and negative ideas due to his interest in dubious occult and possibly Masonic-derived ideas.
Бог един твой дух, едино твое изменение. Позволь мне воспеть твои совершенства.
All of these people are obviously Zionists. They connect to Zionism. And that really brings us on to the second part of the conversation, which I feel is where really the rubber meets the road. And of course, I'm talking about the Ordo Templi Orientis, Freemasonry, Talmud, Jewish mysticism, B'nai B'rith, and the rebuilding of Solomon's Temple.
From banned books during the Soviet era, A slippery KGB-esque Machiavellian, Dugin attempts to move seamlessly across various political tendencies wearing a different mask depending on the audience he is addressing, in the hopes of hoodwinking people into supporting a new Judeo-Muscovite empire.
A Russian state, Putin personally, has nothing against Israel, or against Jews. So normally, in our society, we have no hostility toward Jews or toward Israel. And more than that, we have many Russian Jews that are living there. So there is a kind of sympathy for Israel and for Jews in Russia in general. So being anti-West, anti-NATO, we are not against Israel by the principle.
Zionists. And you really got to ask the question, how does Zionism connect to Freemasonry? Okay, well, what are the fundamentals of Freemasonry? Number one, Jewish mysticism. Number two, rebuilding Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Okay, that is really the fundamentals of Freemasonry. And this is why Freemasonry is a very important component to all of this. Now, Dugin himself is actually, don't take my word for it, have a look for it for yourself, and you'll find that he's a very big advocate of Aleister Crowley, who some would call a pedophile. Now, he also indulges in, black magic. He's into Blue Lodge Freemasonry and all of this sort of stuff. In fact, if you go to the Ordo Templi Orientis website, they claim to be a Masonic order. Now, this is significant because of its of the overtones, which I think are anti-logos, anti-Christian, anti-rationality, and pro-communist. There's so many polarities between the Christian Bible and the Freemasonic doctrine. It is so polarizing, they're almost opposites. This is very important, I think. And the fact that Dugin is an advocate for the OTO and Aleister Crowley directly, I think it ties into what you're talking about in regards to trying to get homosexuals away from the left and into conservatism.
Hello, comrades. I'm here today to talk about the situation of our movement.
He wants to blur the lines between Jews and whites. That is his goal. His goal is to blur the lines between the Jews and the whites, and Europe and Israel will have an alliance and essentially blend together, and the white race will be essentially diversity. The real diversity of the world will disappear forever in Europe, and then it will be gone, because it took tens of thousands of years to cultivate the differences that currently exist.
We were able to do the unthinkable, and that is bring together our movement to create a machine where we were able to get our message out through podcasts, through activism events, through leafleting, doing real life meetings, whether it's the Daily Stormer book clubs, your pool parties, membership organizations like the TWP and others, to bring people together to know that they aren't alone, that white Americans can come together and organize as young professionals, college students, family men and women, and be able to create a real movement.
He has been embraced by the Kremlin to some extent, mainly because of his geopolitical theories of how to destroy the Judeo-American empire.
Now, are you scared yet? Because there's more, as in a lot more. Page 216 on the construction of the Eurasian Empire. Quote, "At the basis of the geopolitical construction of this Eurasian Empire, there must be placed one fundamental principle, the principle of a common enemy. A negation of Atlanticism, a repudiation of the strategic control of the United States, and the rejection of the supremacy of economic liberal market values. This represents the common civilizational basis, the common impulse which will prepare the way for a strong political and strategic union." Close quote. So basically, the Eurasian Empire is basically the union of America haters. Now that sounds lovely. Now, this is the man who, in mid-1990s, when he was writing this book, was also the main agitator for an organization called the National Bolshevik Party, an informal fascist organization that managed to get its own members of parliament, no less, in internal Russian politics.
В нашем российском, русском обществе принципиально нет. У нас нет рассудка и воли. Рассудка и воли у нас нет. То, что мы называем рассудком и волей, таковыми не являются. Поэтому постмодерн у нас это имитация того, что есть где-то, где модерн начался, прошел и, как бы сказать, был преодолен новым этапом. Мы же находимся на первом подступах к модерну. У нас этот переход модернизации проходил особым образом, русским образом. Во-вторых, он разрушал эффективно традиционные структуры, но не создавал эффективно структур модернистических. И самого главного в том, что составляет суть перехода от архаического общества к обществу модерна, не произошло. Вот процента архаического у нас намного больше, чем процента модернистского. У нас не произошло формирование субъекта, то есть чего-то, наделенного волей и разумом, и действующим на основании воли и разума, самое главное. Вот элементами этого, конечно, были и большевики, и Петр, и староверы, например, русские, которые действительно среди такого общего конформистского христианства, они говорили: я верю и думаю так-то. На самом деле их там жгли за это, подпрессовали, говорят: нет, все равно, я думаю, вопреки большинству. Вот эта способность основывать суждения на собственной воле и на собственном разумении истины у русской культуре.
Now, this organization, the National Bolshevik Party, eventually did split along the lines of Putin-loving. So Dugin was on the Putin-loving splinter group, which now no longer uses the name National Bolshevik Party, but rather calls itself the Neo-Eurasian Movement. It's funny because this is a case of ideological subversion that is plainly obvious and honest, yet you are called a conspiracist whenever you talk about it. Anyway, back to Dugin's books. Dugin's Plan for Europe, page 369, quote, "The task of Moscow is to tear Europe away from the control of the United States, to assist European unification, and to strengthen ties with Central Europe under the aegis of the fundamental external axis Moscow-Berlin. Eurasia needs a united, friendly Europe." And in pages 251 to 252, Dugin had already clarified that the goal is a, quote, supranational empire in which ethnic Russians would, quote, occupy a privileged position, close quote. Now, if you think that resembles the Soviet Union, you would, of course, be correct. And Dugin himself is very open about it and admits it one page later at page 253, where he notes that his ethnic model is quite similar with the Soviet Union. And by quite similar, we will be excused if we presume to mean identical, since I have yet to see anything in Dugin's visions of the future that does not lead to gulags and extreme poverty by means.
Unlike traditional Russian nationalists of the Black Hundred Cloth, he claims to be opposed. He's opposed to anti-Semitism. So that's not racist, you know, calling somebody an anti-Semite, but talking about democracy or human rights is. That's suspicious.
Idea to use some postmodern strategies, and that is good in itself. So why not? If first, second, I think there was the effort to introduce in very, very rigid American or paleo-conservative discourse and against neo-conservatives who are liberals and global.
Has glorified the Kabbalah, okay, and has posted on message boards associated with the Turkey-based Marranos, which may link in with his highly dubious political connections to Turkish pseudo-nationalist political movements. He approves of people doing what Negro tribes in the West Atlantic do, which is breeding humans as slaves in order to eat them. He approves of people breeding humans as slaves in order to eat them. Let's click on that source. Oh, the source is gone. If somebody can find that for me, where did Dugin say, I approve, raise your own human slaves so that you can eat them? I would love to find that. But right now, I mean, it just looks like Alex Jones and Dugin were planted as the think tanks of the two big, powers, the United States and Russia. And now through mass media, we've got so many people coming under this nationalist movement, which frankly doesn't sound like nationalism at all. I mean, it really sounds terrible. Think about this. Whenever we talk about these things, we're talking on a worldwide platform. So how can I possibly have a nationalist effect on politics if there's always Europeans and controlled opposition trying to dictate the narrative to this more global initiative that Alex Jones and Dugin clearly represent?
For that, we could not gain.
So Ukraine and Syria are all about proving to America that they're not the boss.
Yes, absolutely.
We need to understand that Russia is no more communist. We couldn't apply the old Cold War cliche, old Cold War models to understanding on new today.
In order to explain to the West that if any truth is relative, so we have our special Russian truth that you need to accept as something that maybe is not your truth.
Even if it's not true.
But if the truth is relative, that doesn't mean that the truth doesn't exist.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletter. Just visit